He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've...
Hey, welcome back for Season 2, Episode 24 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Last week, we rounded out all of my predictions for MLB awards. Then I read up on the Women's Pro Baseball League, whose tryouts wrapped up on Monday at the Nationals ballpark. And believe it or not, that was about it. And now this whole week, I just get to gloat about my fantasy drafts. That's sort of what it feels like, and that's often how you feel the moment that your draft ends, but then so precious few people ever feel that way after another 6 or 8 weeks. Anyway, here's another Fantasy Football Friday. I'm playing in the same 2 leagues this year as I did last, although one went from 8 players to 9. It's going to be interesting and kind of a relief having a bye week or 2 in that league. I'm still not actually sure how that schedule is going to shake out. I haven't really looked too far ahead with 9 teams. I know not every league in the world is drafted yet, and it gets exponentially more difficult to coordinate a time the more people you have in your league. I'm going to throw in a few tips at the end for anybody who hasn't drafted yet, but here are the lineups I put together. Crazy enough, one of my league's draft orders was random, and then in the other one we picked in reverse order of last year's standings, and I still ended up with the last pick of the first round in both of them. Then with the snake draft, if you've heard of that term, that meant I got back-to-back picks with the first pick of the second round too, and I was geeking about that. Now I'll just give you my full slate of picks for each. The team that I'm happier about reads like this. I picked the Cowboys' Ceedee Lamb, who fell to 9th overall, and that dropped my jaw. You better familiarize yourself with ADP, average draft position, because that's going to feature real strongly in this segment. I had a chance at a couple of really nice receivers, but in that league I didn't feel like going 0 running backs, so I took Devon Achane next at 10. 27 and 28 were my next picks. Also insane value. Brock Bowers, the consensus best tight end on the planet, and Brian Thomas Jr., who I saw had an average draft position of around 14th. So this was twice as late, essentially, as he was supposed to go. 5th and 6th round picks, James Cook and Ladd McConkey. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Travion Henderson in the 7th and 8th. Finally, I had to take a quarterback. I got sort of stuck with Brock Purdy in round 10, and I took Jerry Jeudy right before him on the last pick of round 9. And to round out my starters, I'm rolling with the number 1 scoring defense and kicker from last year, Broncos defense, and Pittsburgh's Chris Boswell. Those are all of my planned starters, at least. I'm going to have Ladd McConkey in the flex to start the year. Unsurprisingly, that draft recap gave me an A grade, and as quarterbacks were going really way too early in that draft, I couldn't have done a whole lot better, especially compared to ADP. I won this league last year with a lineup that I feel was similar on paper, but it was a lot more running back heavy, and I feel like I should make the championship at minimum there. My other lineup reads like this in a 10-player league. I am ready to let Christian McCaffrey hurt me again, so I took him 10th overall. I know the Niners signed Brian Robinson after Washington cut him, and I did this anyway. I'm so stubborn. Then 11th, I took Puka Nacua. I took a quarterback earlier than I ever have, Jaden Daniels at pick 30. Then Ladd McConkey again at 31. I'm putting a lot of faith in him, but I like that connection with Herbert a lot, and they developed it throughout the year. 5th and 6th round, I definitely didn't need to go receiver twice, but all the starting caliber running backs were gone, so I went with Xavier Worthy and DK Metcalf. I'm still not sure if Isaiah Pacheco is going to be a workhorse with the Chiefs. I don't think anybody's sure exactly how they're going to use him, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to start him. I took Pacheco at 70th overall. Then I was actually super glad that there was still any kind of fringe tight end ones on the board. I ended up going with the Browns' David Njoku at 71st. Brock Purdy is going to be my backup quarterback over there. My kicker is the Cowboys' Brandon Aubrey. If you listened last year, you'll know I think he is the best on earth. I think he is going to shatter a whole bunch of kicking records. And then the Texans' defense. I'm going to flex Xavier Worthy for now, especially because the Chiefs, sort of de facto number 1 receiver Rashee Rice just accepted a 6-game suspension. We're really going to have to watch the Chiefs pretty close to see how they use all their receivers. I think I heard that they're keeping 8 guys in their receiving room right now, not including Rice. If Worthy ends up not being their top guy, then I might go with Metcalf in the flex most weeks. The recap for this one also gave me an A, but that kind of makes some assumptions. I'm going to need McCaffrey to be his old self, or I will be absolutely doomed to waivers for running backs. I hate doing that. I'm going to need Jaden Daniels to kind of come close to his projections this year at least. He's projected as QB4. If those things come true, I'm going to feel really good for at least a top 3 finish, but you never know until you see how the usage works out for all of your running backs and receivers. Now some of those tips and tricks for anybody who hasn't already drafted. Don't let recency bias completely control you. A player isn't chronically injury prone just because they might have missed games last year with injury, unless they're Christian McCaffrey, of course. And a high scorer from last year is not necessarily going to be a high scorer this year, right? Jonnu Smith was tight end 4, but now he doesn't have any clear path to repeating that kind of performance, as he's probably going to now be the number 2 tight end on the Steelers roster, competing with Pat Freiermuth for targets. Also, don't count on whatever player you're targeting at a certain position to still be available by the time you're on the clock. I've seen lots of funny things happen this year with average draft position, and some people just like a player so much that they're going to pick them regardless of their quote-unquote value. And lastly, always follow the volume. The best running backs in the world aren't going to be top 10 at their position if they only get 10 touches a game. The flip side is a receiver who doesn't have all the elite physical tools who gets 12 targets a game almost certainly will be top 10. Remember, PPR, if that's what your league is playing, is points per reception. Catching the football is the easiest way to score points consistently and keep your floor super high. As always, I hope someone can take these tips, learn some other things, make good moves, and win their league, as long as they're not in one of mine. And that's all for this Fantasy Football Friday. The next thing I want to talk about all started, as far as I'm aware, through memes. They really have such performative power for culture and vernacular. It's amazing and kind of concerning. The topic was MLB division realignment. There were times when the league was organized more strangely than it is now. I'm actually old enough to remember the Astros being in the National League. I'm also old enough to remember them being the worst team in the National League. And I say old enough, that was only 2013, but it sounds so ugly and wrong to say that not very long ago, there were 16 teams in the NL and 14 in the AL. The divisions had to be wonky for that reason. The NL Central had 6 teams, the West and the East had 5, and then over in the AL West, they only had 4. The big focus that a lot of people want to see right now is perfect geographic alignment. Of course, from there, the idea spreads like wildfire, but it also mutates and it turns into all sorts of other crazy groupings online. I'll go over some of the funny ones in a moment. Look, I thought this was just a pipe dream of a crazy fan at first, but then the MLB Commissioner, Rob Manfred, goes on a broadcast on ESPN, a Mariners-Mets game about 2 weeks ago, and he's asked by one of the broadcasters about expansion. I'm going to actually take a little soundbite from there and hope I don't get in trouble for playing it. I've never tried something quite like this, but of course I'll link the video it came from too and all that jazz. So here's the commissioner on realignment.
How about a window into the future? Expansion, realignment, expanded playoffs. I mean, Can you see that down the road?
I can. I think the first 2 topics are related in my mind. I think if we expand, it provides us with an opportunity to geographically realign. I think we could save a lot of wear and tear on our players in terms of travel. And I think our postseason format would be even more appealing for, entities like ESPN, because you'd be playing up out of the East, out of the West, in that 10 o'clock time slot where we, sometimes get Boston, Anaheim, would be 2 West Coast teams. And that 10 o'clock slot that's a problem for us sometimes becomes a real opportunity for our West Coast audience. So I think, I think the owners realize that there's demand for Major League Baseball in a lot of great cities, and that we have an opportunity to do something good around that expansion process.
And so, a lot to unpack there. There are definitely cities which have interest in getting an MLB franchise. How would there not be? The league hasn't expanded, that is, added any new teams, since 1998 with the Devil Rays and Diamondbacks. And that might not sound like a tremendously long time until you consider that from the start of the expansion era in 1961 to 1993, the second to last expansion, it went from 16 to 28, or an average of about 1 team per 2.7 years. Unsurprisingly, in order to keep an even number of teams, they weren't added that way, one every couple of years. They were added mostly in pairs, with the biggest expansion year ever being 1969. At that time, you had the Montreal Expos. The two unchanged and unmoved franchises were the Royals and the Padres, and the Seattle Pilots. Yeah, that name was probably as terrible then as it is now to look back on, and it is so poetic that the Pilots became the Brewers, who are now the best team in baseball this year. The most likely and convenient thing to do, of course, is nail down 2 expansion cities that could be ready to play by 2030, if Manfred wants to talk such big game. The great irony, or maybe the exact explanation for his picking that date, is that his last term as commissioner is going to be up in January of 2029. Smart man, open up a can of worms and then let somebody else wrangle them. It's going to have to be one team for each league, if it happens. And anything more than 32 just starts to sound really crowded and the math gets even trickier. For the National League team, I've heard Salt Lake City tossed about before. There's still some more room in California, Oregon, something else out west. For the American League, something in Tennessee or Texas. I know Nashville actually made a list from Fox Sports that I'll link of sort of the best prospective cities. Maybe Indianapolis? And of course, geography is the number one reason why a lot of people want to see this happen. I'm going to drop a poll on this episode, something to the effect of, would you want to see 4 divisions of 8 teams, 8 divisions of 4 teams, 2 big conferences, or do you think the league's as good as it's going to get? I also like what Manfred said about mileage or wear and tear on players. There are undeniably such things as favorable and unfavorable schedules. To make it to and from all 162 regular season games this year, the Padres have to travel over 46,800 miles. The Cubs, less than half of that at about 23,000. Time zones are related to geography, of course. The fewest number of total time zone jumps for the season belongs to the Yankees, and it's pretty easy to figure out which time zone every team in the AL East is in, and they play a lot of those. Plus, they have, in this regard, a super favorable non-division slate where they only have 12 games on the West Coast. The Angels are going to cross the most time zones this year with 58. You could really simplify this into a handful of words. The Midwest is a great place to play when it comes to travel, and the West Coast is a disaster. I'll link where I found all this data because I got lost in it, and it explains everything so well in context. Another thing to think about. 22 out of 30 teams right now play in either Eastern or Central time zones. You have only the Rockies and Diamondbacks playing on Mountain Time, and then, of course, the last 6 are all Pacific. So 8 teams are playing those division games in the late slots. That sounds not so bad. Now, if you add a franchise that's on Pacific Time, let's say Portland, and there's 9 teams out west, and you're still trying to put teams together by geography, you can't even do that in even numbers, so someone is going to have to get shoehorned into a division that doesn't fit them. I didn't realize I felt any kind of way about this until I was smacked in the face with all these numbers, and I got firmly convinced that something needs to change. The idea that I hate the most is going to an NBA-style Eastern and Western Conference where divisions and even leagues are kind of meaningless. Postseason seeding becomes another concern. How many teams could you possibly let into the playoffs before it feels like it's not exclusive or impressive anymore? If there were, say, 8 divisions of 4 teams each, you have to guarantee a playoff spot for every single division winner, right? And lastly, in a few of these examples, there are some major division rivalries that would cease to exist. Giants-Dodgers is one. Cardinals-Cubs is one that could be threatened. Like so many of these other massive issues, I'm glad I don't have to think day-to-day about them and make any kind of decisions on them. I certainly think that the end of the current decade is an aggressive target, but it gets made even more tricky by the fact that the league's current collective bargaining agreement runs out after next year. There's a real chance of a league lockout when that happens, just like we got back in 2022 when it was time to draft the current CBA. There's going to be salary cap and floor discussions. There might be contract length limits. There might be so many other competitive balance changes, right? And now you throw in realignments that will help a lot of teams, but also hurt some others, and all the sides are really going to struggle to agree on anything. I won't pretend to know anything about the process of bidding to join the league from a team's side or anything, but I bet it's a big one with a lot of sunk cost. These potential expansion franchises are going to want to know what they're getting into. There's probably going to have to be an expansion draft the offseason before they come in to fill out their rosters. I'm saying all of this in a more concrete tone now because if it weren't likely to happen, I think that there are a lot of ways Rob Manfred could have dodged that question on that broadcast. Instead, maybe we're reading into it a little bit, but I thought he leaned into it and revealed a lot. Now, here are some of the more fun, fanciful ideas for realignment. If you have an all-bird division, you might have the Cardinals, Orioles, and Blue Jays all together. Some people have said rough groupings by primary logo colors, which would probably look bad on camera, or maybe it just requires more uniform combos to gloss over. You could have a division of teams with colors in the name. The Reds, Red Sox, White Sox, Blue Jays. Another one with animal teams, Marlins, Tigers, Cubs, Diamondbacks. Imagine the travel for the non-Tigers and Cubs games. That one would be insane. I've heard separation by market size. That's an interesting one only because it would probably make for very competitive play in each division, and you wouldn't have that talent gap between, let's say, this year's Rockies and Dodgers. But then sorting out the playoffs would be difficult, and presumably the big market teams would continue to win most all the World Series. Basically, these are fun, whimsical, many of them make great memes, but it is highly likely that before the decade is out, there will be a division/conference/league realignment based at least in part on geography when the league expands to 32 teams. Okay, you might have heard this week that Taylor Swift's boyfriend is now her fiancé. In fact, if you could have avoided that news, I would be shocked. All it did really was make me move Kelsey even a little bit further down my fantasy board. In all seriousness, yes, they end up on the news a ton, and they are force-fed to us sometimes. But if she unironically makes the NFL billions of dollars and brings millions of new female fans primarily into the mix, it is a net positive. That's all the airtime they get, though. I had a fantastic time at the USA Powerlifting Iron Games meet this past weekend in Traverse City, and I'll link that for you one more time in the description. I saw a lot of the heaviest lifts I've seen in person, and the level of competition was higher than any powerlifting meet I've been to by far. It was also the most well-run, the most well-equipped. They're powerlifters, so there's always plenty of good food. And this crew generally did everything better than I have ever seen before. The whole stream was in 1080p, 60 FPS, without a single dropped frame for almost 5.5 hours, and no glitches. The judges were strict, the standards were high, it was a bigger, nicer venue than I've ever seen. 10 out of 10, no notes. The best news is, with the same meet directors, I've already agreed to be on the call for the Michigan State Championships in November. I might have mentioned that before, but I'm super excited because they have a lot of ambitious plans, and we really have a chance to make it one of the best powerlifting live streams ever. That bar is not very high at all, and I would really love to have a hand in changing that. When it gets close, as always, I'll link that for you. Enjoy the new intro and outro, too. Thanks for coming back week after week, or, of course, if you're relatively new here, we are so happy to have you. Either way, check out all my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, @TheVoiceOfTanner, X, just Voice of Tanner, YouTube, the whole thing spelled out with the spaces. Leave a like, comment, and share. Catch you next week. This has been Season 2, Episode 24 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've